Welcome, everyone. My name is Greg Pratt. I'm the Director of Adult Faith Formation here. So Lucy is the Director of Religious Education, so she's in charge of all the kids, and I'm not in charge of any of the adults, but I help out with the Adult Faith Formation here. Some of you might know, because just about any time I ever speak, I bring this up. I was raised without faith. So I was raised in a household that didn't believe in God. And so for the first 48 years of my life, I didn't believe in God. I wanted to, but I couldn't do it because I was raised with math and science. You know, math and science explains the whole world, and you don't need God and all that kind of stuff. So that's just the way things worked. I want to tell you, just for a couple of minutes, a moment in my life that was absolutely pivotal, utterly changed my life. And this first part's going to seem like it's all about me, but I promise it goes into your kids in a couple of minutes. In the spring of 2011, I read an absolutely fascinating book. For the first 7 chapters, the author was talking about how, just sort of observing the kind of human interactions that we're used to seeing, sort of very, common life, but was extracting things out of it and sort of learning about human nature and how we interact and what goes on in our minds and how morality shapes us and all that kind of stuff. It was utterly fascinating. And I fell in love with the way that this author wrote. And then in the 8th chapter, he brings up God and he starts describing Jesus. And for just a couple of paragraphs, the author described how Jesus went around forgiving sins and healing people and, all the stuff that that Jesus does and says. And then he explained that the reason he did these couple of paragraphs to set up who Jesus was to avoid the foolish statement that a lot of people make about Jesus, which is, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept that he's God. And that statement hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember like it was yesterday because that's exactly how I thought. That's exactly what I thought about Jesus. That was my mindset for who he was for 40 plus years. And, great moral teacher, but not God. And as I said, I've always wanted to believe in God, but I couldn't. But the author had my attention, and then he went on to explain in just a couple of sentences how it was logically impossible to hold that opinion of Jesus. He says if you look at the Bible and you read about Jesus and you see what he's done and said and all that kind of stuff, there's really only 3 things that you can believe about him, because it's not possible to say that he's a great moral teacher if he's merely a man going around saying and doing the things that he does. You can't consider him a great moral teacher. So the 3 things were either he isn't God and he knows he's not God, in which case he's a liar. Or he's not God, but he thinks he's God, in which case he's a lunatic. Or the third option is he is God, in which case he's our Lord and Savior. And I remember that night because it's sort of like the stool had been knocked out from underneath me. My understanding of Jesus was great moral teacher. And he, in a couple of sentences, just wiped that out. So it was like, okay, I got to replace that with something. So I said, okay, it was liar, lunatic, or Lord. So I spent a couple of minutes and just sort of said, okay, can I imagine him as a liar? No, that didn't ring true. Can I imagine him as a lunatic? No, that didn't ring true. Can I imagine him as Lord? And I can't tell you that I came to faith at that moment because I didn't. It took about another year. But that one basically supercharged my faith search. And it took another year, but I came to faith based upon that. The author's name that I've been talking about is C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest authors, of all time, but certainly one of the greatest authors of the 20th century. And if you limit it to religious material, he's probably the greatest author of the 20th century. The book is called Mere Christianity. And it's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you've got a logical mind, you just like digging into things and analyzing things, especially faith, it's really a great book. Anyway, we see similar things happen in the Gospels. Jesus offers the original serious choice, because C.S. Lewis offered a serious choice between liar, lunatic, or Lord, a trilemma, 3 things, right? A dilemma is a serious choice between 2 things. A trilemma is a serious choice between 3 things. But Jesus offered the original serious choice, and the event is described in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Jesus sits down with the apostles, and he asks them, who do other people say that I am? Because the apostles were out with the crowds. So they start offering back the different things that people that they've heard about, they start offering back the different things that they've heard other people say about Jesus. Who do other people say that I am? And then he follows that up with, who do you say that I am? And I find this interesting because there is no such thing as bold or italics or underline in ancient Greek. You can't find that anywhere. So how do you underscore, how do you bold the you in the second sentence, in the second question? You ask those two questions side by side. Who do other people say I am? Who do you say that I am? The emphasis just pops out of the fact that those two questions are next to each other. But what he was doing was saying, this isn't an academic exercise, apostles. I'm asking you directly, okay? I really want to know. God wants to know, what's in your heart? Who do you believe? What do you believe? How do you see the world? Okay? It's the same question Jesus asks us today. Who do you say that I am? It's pretty much the same moment of decision that C.S. Lewis kind of gave to me, at this point, 12, 13 years ago. He forced me to confront the difference between what I knew that other people said about Jesus, Son of God, and what I thought about Jesus, great moral teacher. And then he destroyed that one real quick. And when he explained to me that opinion of mine wasn't logically possible, it basically accelerated my search, and I found God about a year later. And along the way, I found a lot of other things that weren't true, just like great moral teacher. Modern culture loves to try and get between us and God. You notice that? Modern culture does its best to try and separate us from our faith. And it does this by very clever statements that are intended to sow doubt in our minds and in your kids' minds. Great moral teacher is a great example. I didn't come up with that phrase, okay? I sort of absorbed it from culture. And it's a pretty pervasive little statement, seeing as C.S. Lewis wrote about it 60, 70 years ago. So it was obviously pervasive back then, and it hasn't been wiped away from the culture since. It stuck with me, okay? And those little phrases are tricky because they're easy to remember, they sound kind of plausible, and most importantly, they satisfy your curiosity. Who's Jesus? Great moral teacher. Okay, thank you, done. My curiosity is satisfied. I don't have to think about it anymore, but the curiosity is satisfied away from God. He's now just a great moral teacher, okay? The people who want to separate us from God have succeeded if we just accept those kinds of things. So if we never stop to challenge those false beliefs, they just stick. And I can vouch for the fact they can stick for decades. But great moral teacher that's just one example. There's quite a few more. I'm not going to go through them all. But there's similar messages with regard to the Bible isn't true, the resurrection never happened, the Eucharist isn't true, the church needs to update its times. Times have changed. We're in the modern world now. The church needs to update its message and change everything. Maybe the music and paint on the walls every once in a while, but no, not the core message. Okay, every single time I stopped and actually analyzed one of these false statements, they fell apart under logical scrutiny. But if you don't do that, they just stick, okay? I found the same logical contradictions in each one of these. Spoiler alert, God exists, the Bible's true, the resurrection did happen, the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, and the church doesn't need to change its message at all. Why? Because God is eternal, God's truths are eternal, and therefore God's truth as handed down to the apostles, that truth doesn't expire. Jesus didn't have all the apostles around and say, let me pour out the wisdom of God into you, but just understand this wisdom is really only good for the next 1,600 years, and then you're going to have to make it up on your own. Or it expires in 2020, and then after that, you're going to have to make... That's not what Jesus said. These are timeless truths. The church doesn't need to update its message. We just need to understand what God wants to teach us, and because that's what's best for our lives. Anyway, I don't know where you are. We'll talk about your kids in a second. I don't know where you are in your faith walk right now. You might be rock solid, or you might, be drifting. I don't know. But I can tell you one thing. I know for a fact modern culture is trying everything it can to undermine your faith. Okay? You're constantly under attack on your faith. And I hope that if anybody here has fallen for one of those easy things to sort of remember about faith that undermines it a little bit, I challenge it. okay? Challenge it. Take this year while your kids are in religious ed and challenge maybe something that separates you from God. By the way, if any of you happen not to be confirmed, you've never gone through the sacrament of confirmation, RCIA starts next week. I start in this classroom right here, classroom. I start next week. If you've never received the fullness of the faith, the fullness of the gifts of the Holy Spirit as they pour out on you in confirmation, you can start getting ready for that starting next week, which is kind of neat. I'd love to have you as part of RCIA, and think about how fun it would be for you to be learning about your faith and moving towards confirmation as your kids are. I don't know, it'd be kind of neat. These set up all sorts of interesting conversations, I would imagine. A synergistic match. Anyway, so if you've always had faith, and see, Lucy, my wife, she's a cradle Catholic, so she's always had this beautiful childlike faith, okay? It's strengthened over the last several years to be sure, but she's always had faith. Me, I grew up, I spent decades without faith. And for someone who, it's one of the reasons why somebody who's come to faith as an adult is so energetic. It's because we really realize how important the faith is. Sometimes if you've grown up with your faith your whole life, you can actually take for granted how powerful it is because you've always had it, okay? Those of us who spend a good portion of our lives without it, boy, wow, what an amazingly powerful gift faith is. And I've lived that progression of no faith, shaky faith, solid faith, and I'm here to tell you it's fantastic. So there's nothing more powerful to know than God exists and he loves you and he's got a great plan, okay? It's nothing. That's why I don't take religious education for granted. I don't put it second to anything. There's nothing that comes close to what's happening upstairs with your kids right now. Nothing can prepare them like that. So, So right now, the volunteers are upstairs, strengthening your kids' faith, walking them through wherever they're at, and they're letting them know that Jesus is Lord, that he loves them, that he's all-knowing, that he's got a plan for their life. It's a perfect plan, and that plan is to make them happy, fulfilled, strong, and secure. That's God's promise to them, if they absorb it all, okay? I wish I had that as a kid. I really do. It really would have made a difference. Okay, I grew up in the 70s. I know I don't look that old, but I grew up in the 70s. And the world wasn't as scary back then as it is now. Okay, the scariest thing back then in the 70s was, well, bell-bottom pants and disco. That was about it. Okay, everything else we had under control. But I still would have loved to have known God. I played Little League. I sang in the choir and all that kind of stuff. But I wish I would have known God because it would have helped and it would have shaped me as a different kind of person. I would have had a better personality. I'm still trying to get better. I fall apart all sorts of places. But imagine having that in your formative years. It would have been really nice. I'm digressing. Anyway, I'm glad I found it later on in life in my 40s, but I wish I had had it earlier. I wish that my adult self could go back to my younger self and say, form a relationship with God. It will pay lifelong dividends to you. It will be fantastic, but I can't do that. So the reason I say that is I really do thank you from the bottom of my heart for having your kids here at Religious Ed, for making it a priority, because you're doing a fantastic service for your kids. It's a great gift, okay? Even if your kid's fighting a little bit with you, it's a great gift, okay? And for letting them know that soccer practice is important and dance lessons are important. They're fantastic. They're great. They're wonderful. They're worthwhile. But for the next few months, this is the priority. This is the priority, okay? There's nothing more important. When you build a house, you start with a solid foundation, right? And because if you skip that boring step, making a solid foundation is boring, okay? But what happens if you just skip that step and you start building the walls and the roof and all the rest of that kind of stuff? What happens to the house in a little while? It just sort of falls apart, okay? Religious ed is the solid foundation that your kids are going to have for their whole life, okay? You can't skip this step and go right to the dance lessons, okay? That's the fun part. Those are the walls. You need to, anyway, you get the idea. This is the solid foundation, and with the world in all sorts of disarray and shifting and all that kind of stuff, you need a good solid foundation. Has anybody noticed that the world is crazy right now? Anyone? Or am I alone in this? Okay, I'm getting a lot of smiles. No hands, but I'm getting a lot of smiles. Okay, thank you. Okay, I've noticed it, and the world's nuts. And I'm really grateful for my faith, knowing that God is bigger than any of the craziness out there, that he's perfect, that he loves me, that he desperately wants to share his wisdom with me about how to live a good, truly, genuinely productive life and with no anxiety. I'm grateful that I understand that he's the foundation of objective truth and something that I can always count on, someone that I can always count on in every moment of my life, even when I mess up, and that's quite often. I'm grateful that heaven is waiting and that it is, provided I stay close to God, and that heaven is going to be even more glorious than I can possibly imagine with my limited imagination, because God's imagination is just so much bigger. All of that knowledge makes me very resilient in this crazy world that we live in. It allows me to see through the lies so they don't affect me quite as much. I'm immune to all those people that want to make me anxious and depressed. They have no power over me, and it's all because of my faith. I really hope that you, sitting here right now, have that kind of faith, where the world outside just can't get to you because you're immune to that kind of stuff. And more importantly, I hope that for your kids. I pray that that's what's happening this year, starting right now upstairs. I hope that that kind of faith just sort of sinks into your kids, where it's just, I want them to be strong and resilient. I want them to be fueled by an inner knowledge that the King of the universe stands by their side and is always their buddy, okay? I want them to be absolutely immune to those people out there that want to make them anxious and confused and fearful and depressed. I want them immune to that. I want them to be able to see through the lies that the world throws at them, and for them to be able to stand on the side of objective truth. I want them to be good kids, and I want them to grow up to be good adults, because the world needs more good people. You and I, okay, all of us in this room, we're kind of sort of set in our ways, except for the few youngsters that are still here. You're still growing, okay? But those of us that are a little older, we're kind of set. You know, our personalities are there, right? It's like, I keep trying to get better, but my personality is kind of set, okay? Upstairs, your kids, they're still forming their personalities. It's still happening. There's a little bit of blank slate left. And part of them is still deciding whether or not they're going to be good and decent and kind and loving, or if they're just going to be indifferent. And if they know God, if they know that and they know the love of God, and they absorb and accept the wisdom that he wants to pour into them, then they're going to be good people. And that's what we want to have happen. In order to make that happen, we need to work together. Frankly, you've got a responsibility that is bigger than just dropping them off at the right time. That's just the bottom line. God will spread the seeds, but he's depending on you and the volunteers upstairs to work together to make rich soil so the seeds can throw down good roots, so your kids can have a good solid foundation, so your kids can thrive. The teachers and assistants upstairs, they can't do it alone, because you're always going to be the strongest influence on your kids, especially when it comes to faith. So they simply can't do a complete job upstairs if you're not bringing them to Mass every weekend, for instance, okay? Think about the conflicting message that sets up. You know, God is the most important thing, the most important person to know ever. He's going to be there for you forever. Or he's something less than that, something a little less than what we had planned for Sunday. Look at that conflicting message, okay? It's not good. And some of you say, well, that's my only day off. You know, I work 6 days a week. That's my only day off. I need my own. Fine, take the 23 hours, but get the 1 hour in, okay? Set up that solid foundation with your kid. I know some of you are Mass going every weekend, and I'm just preaching to the choir here, but some of you not, okay? How much, you know, Mass, getting to Mass, how much is your kid's life worth, a good life? You know, how much is it worth for them to have the strength, the security, the confidence to be able to face this world, okay, by knowing God and knowing that he loves them? By the way, if you're here and you go, oh, we go to Mass every once in a while, it's going to seem weird to my kid if I start going all the time. That's okay, just be straight with them, you know. Something about dropping you off at religious ed made me think, you know what, we need to get a little closer to God. We're going to Mass every week. Oh, great, okay, that's wonderful, problem solved, okay. One last little tangent, and then I'm done in about 2 minutes. When I got serious about my faith, I spent about a year absorbing everything. I mean, just absorbing everything. But there were a few times where I pushed back. I was like, I've learned something from the world that wasn't quite right, and God was telling me something else, and I sort of said, wait. And every time I researched it again, I came to realize that God was right. But there was times where I pushed back, okay? The kids upstairs, they're not 7 years old. Yesterday I was talking to the kids, the parents that all had like 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds up there, and they're not going to push back the same way I did, but you guys have teenagers. You might get a little pushback. They might follow in my footsteps. If I can make a suggestion to you, okay? And you're the parent, so you've got the final say, obviously. But if I can make a suggestion to just sort of have in your head, and you decide what you want to do. If they ever bristle at something that's said upstairs, if they ever take offense to something that's said upstairs, please don't immediately come to their defense. Find out what it is that God wanted to teach them, and then see if that's something that you want to affirm. And if it's something that you need to pick up the phone and maybe call Lucy, call the DRE, or call the catechist, do so politely, please, and find out what it is. What is it that you wanted to pass on from God to my kid? Let me make sure I understand it, because misunderstandings do happen, okay? But God's always right. So if it really was God's words that sort of was sent out, then we just need to clear up the confusion. Anyway. The volunteers upstairs need your help with forming your kids with regard to their faith, because there's a sad truth, and I know that we all know this, okay? There are people out there that actively want to destroy your children's minds. They're just dead set on it. These people want to get their tentacles into your kids' minds and just sort of rip them apart, and we want to stop that. You can only protect them for so many hours a day, and you can only protect them for so many years until you have to release them to the world. So it's best to make them strong, okay? If they have a solid foundation in their faith, if they know God, if they trust God, if they understand His objective truths, then they can fend for themselves, okay? They'll have far greater protection from the people that want to mess with their heads now as adults and when they're, now as kids and when they're adults. It's the greatest gift you can give your kids. That's why it's worth it to get up on Sunday morning and go to Mass if you're not going. Okay? That's why it's worth it to make sure that your kids know that these classes are the priority for the next few months. Okay? Soccer and dance lessons and all that kind of stuff can be the priority later, but right now we're building a solid foundation. We're here. Okay? That's why it's worth it, and I would strongly encourage you to engage your kids on the drive home. What did you learn? Take a genuine interest in what they did, and try and affirm that, amplify that, and bond with your child over a shared love of God. There's no greater connection you can have with anybody. Personalities will clash, and over time, there's these fightings that go on. But if you've got a shared love of your faith, that weathers any storm for your whole lives. So please make these classes the priority for the next few months so your children can reap the rewards of what God has to tell them for the rest of their lives and for eternity. Thanks for listening. May God bless you, may God bless the volunteers, and may God bless your kids. That's it.